I've been meaning to do this for many a year, and I had the opportunity recently because I took my 802 system out to do summer school and hadn't used it for 2 years. So I checked it over and took it, and I thought I'd use this opportunity to do a review, really, because I've heard a lot about Bose. I'm sure you all have. Got some examples later. Let me just tell you about my system and then show it to you. Put it together in '93. Had the speakers first, driving it with an H&H amp through the equalizer. H&H amp couldn't really cut it. Didn't got enough. It's only 100 watts. They want 240 a side or something. And then got the monstrous 1800, and then put it all in a rack, which has got 93. I put a sticker on the inside so I could remember when I did it. So that was all second hand. 2 new things. That was a Lasis reverb, which since failed, so I got another one. And the desk was new. And that, the power supply failed, but it was just a dry joint, so I managed to sort that, so still got the same desk. And the other thing that was new at the time was the Bose controller, EQ. The power amp was second hand when I got it in '93. Don't know how old it is, obviously from the 80s. And the speakers, one pair, quite old, one pair a little bit newer, but both of them Series 1. So late 70s, early 80s. So that's what we're looking at. You can find all this online, but maybe I could tell you the design principles behind the 802, which I think are quite nice, actually. Question is, does it work, of course? So what are the principles? It's an articulated array for wide coverage, so as you can see from the video later, there are several planes on which the 2 drivers are mounted, there and then to the side slightly there, so it gives a 120-degree dispersion, so it's curved at the front. They suggest having 2 aside. They would, wouldn't they? Have you seen the price? We'll get to that later. When you have 2 aside, then you've got 4 drivers, 4 drivers, 4 drivers, 4 drivers. So it starts to act as a line array as well. So you know these PAs with the long poles, which I think Bose might have been the first to do this. Might have. No, they were in churches and stuff as well. See those long speakers in churches? They act as line arrays. So a line array, it seems, has greater projection for the power and the number of drivers than it does in different configurations. So the Bose there have got a bit of both when you use 2 aside. They use 8 4.5-inch drivers, 1 ohm speakers, 8 of them there, no woofer and no tweeter. So it's quite interesting already. That becomes even more interesting because I know what you're thinking. How are you going to get the lows? How are you going to get the highs? Well, that mid-range tweeter covers the most critical area of the voice, and then they force it lower and force it higher with the Bose controller. It can handle 240 watts, pink noise it says. It's got a plastic cabinet which is actually mica-reinforced polythene copolymer foam, apparently. And I read somewhere, though Bose don't say this, but you can tell that the cabinet resonates at the lower frequencies, and somebody said that acts a little bit as a passive radiator. So that's all calculated with the controller, with the testing and so on.
I hear no highs. I feel no lows. It sounds like shh. It must be Bose. Unfair, I think. The Bose 802 speaker. Both of these are Mark 1, and as recommended, 2 per side, which drops the impedance to 8 ohms. We'll have a look at the pair with the front cover off. Show you my 802s. So here they are with the front covers off. They're Series 1s, and I had to modify all the drivers. As you can see, there's 8 drivers in each cabinet, and these are the ports. They're ported. The casing is kind of a plastic, and it's designed to resonate supposedly to increase the bass. It becomes like an auxiliary radiator. Now, these are actually the older ones, and all of those drivers are replaced with Series 2 drivers, which you can see have a fabric surround, and I notice quite firm, the suspension. These have got replacement foam surrounds. All of the drivers in all 4 cabinets, that's 32 drivers, the foam rotted and went. £60 a driver times 32, forget it. But in America, they sell a foam replacement kit. Takes some practice, I've got to tell you. So you remove all the crumbling foam, you scrape it all from the edge of the, which isn't so bad from the edge of this, but for each one. So I remove each one, obviously, to do that. I don't know if I did remove them all. Sometimes it's easier to leave them seated. But then you have to try to remove that baked-on foam from the edge of the paper cone without wrecking it. And then center, position and glue the new foam surround. The actual parts and the glue, as you can imagine, are very little. And you've got the basket and a big magnet on the back. So one thing you do is throw all that lot away. Anyway, I thought rather helpfully, I noticed that I put here, if I could see, there's my monocle, that I did these, replaced the drivers completely, I can see in March 96. So in March of 96, I replaced all these drivers. The drivers I took out had 79 to about 82 stamped on the back of them. So I replaced all those because I wrecked some trying to refoam them. This was the earlier cabinet, I had a go, and then I had another go later with, this was the later cabinet, and then the foam on these went, and I replaced all these in August 2003. So I did all right with those, a couple of them with a cross on theirs. When I tested them just on their own with a very low frequency, I heard some noise, which, not rubbing of the voice coil, but maybe some surplus glue around the place. But, of course, when they're in a cabinet and you're not putting 30 hertz through them, they won't respond to 30 hertz anyway. It was fine. And the same with, of course, right down the end there, the other cabinet. Anything else? Yes. Well, I'll let you hear them in a minute, just with a mic test. I'm running them from this, which is the Bose 1800 Mark I, sitting here silently. Let me turn that up. You won't hear any hiss, because it doesn't make any hiss. It doesn't make any scratching noises with the pots either, despite the fact I think they started making those in '69. This is a latest model because it's got the removable cord, so it may be early 80s. And there it sits, just doing its thing. You must use the Bose equalizer, which has a massive EQ curve. You can check it out online. If you use it without, they sound horrible. In fact, you'll get, I hear no highs, I feel no lows. It sounds like, shh, it must be Bose. And on the top, oh, someone's put their music there. Thank you. I must make sure I put it back, because that'll stuff the gig up. Soundcraft, I believe. All of it I have fitted into a case, as you can see. Excuse the camera angles, because I'm doing it one-handed, as you can tell. Is it Soundcraft? Spirit Folio. Oh, with my COVID mask sitting there. Sorry about that, din. So there it is. Round the back, I'll just show you. There's the mighty 1800 with the big heat sinks. Scarcely gets warm. With two 802s aside, it's 400 watts per channel, or 250 watts per channel, into 8 ohms. And I put this together, can I see? I put a little sticker inside, because I'm that kind of a guy, and no, I can't. Bought all this stuff in March 1993, and we're now in July 2001. And there it is, and the only things that have failed was the reverb. It's the new things, the things that were new. All this was second-hand when I put it together in '93, so the things that have failed were the things that were new, which is the reverb, which is the latest reverb, so I had to replace that. And I had trouble with the desk, but I found that it was a dry joint in the power supply. So I resoldered that, and unks your bubble. So now I'll let you see what it sounds like, and you can tell me, just with voice. Okay, just using the camera mic, the mic on the camera, quite close to the speaker, quite a flat response, you can tell, otherwise it'd be feeding back by now. That's one of the advantages not having a tweeter or a horn. It doesn't have those spikes, which those cheap horns have. This has got a little bit of a lift, this M88, as you know, it works very well with this. So here I am just speaking, going to bring it a bit closer for some proximity. As you can tell, they're very cleanly. I don't know how well the camera mic picks it up, and it's a very reverberant hall, as you can hear. Bringing it a bit closer still. Bringing it a bit closer still. Bring a bit closer still. Bring a bit closer still. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you need more highs? Do you need more highs? Do you need more highs? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What more do you want? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, quite an interesting design. It varies from the usual. What might be the advantages? Okay, the dispersion might be an advantage. Another advantage might be that you don't have a crossover right in the sensitive area of vocals, which is often where a crossover would have to be. And because you've got the same size drivers, you can have that curved front. Otherwise, you'd have to figure out if you had one big one, what you're going to do. That's one way of looking at it then, just have a mid-range driver and force that driver higher and lower with the controller. A little bit more on the design is that also the lid, I know it's not a big thing, but you take that lid off, if you're familiar with it, it's like this, you can take the lid off and it's got indentations in it, grooves, and the bottom of the speaker has protrusions and they'll fit on the lid. So you can use the lid just as a bit of a standoff from the floor. Also, the top cabinet will mate into those grooves, not desperately securely, but enough to stop it shaking or wobbling out. But it's not locked in there; it just sort of slots in. So it's useful. I've never had them come apart on the stand. The lid also can be used the other way up on the floor, and the speaker will sit at an angle in the lid, and it just slots in again with these indentations. So it leaves it kind of at 45 degrees for a monitor. Now, you might be thinking all this is not a big deal, but I'm starting to think there's obviously some thoughts gone into this. Question is, does it work? But some thought has gone in, and it seems to me that there's some sensible and sound reasoning behind it. Looking at the price, well, they seem to be difficult to find at the moment. I don't know. I think we're on Series 3. I couldn't find any for sale in the UK. Maybe it's me. I had to spend about half an hour looking. So, Series 3s, haven't got the ports at the front. Well, they have, but they're not protruding there underneath. But the last I could find was that they're £1,500 per cabinet. Is that with VAT? I'm assuming it must be including VAT. So 1,500 per cabinet. So 4 cabinets, as I have here, if you were to buy them new, you're looking at £6,200. Ooh. And then, guess what? That's happened to me. You must use the controller. Really? Actually, the answer is yes. And I'll see why. I couldn't find my equivalent controller, or anyone actually, apart from second-hand ones, but when I bought it, I know it was £250, and that was in 93. That made me hesitate. But I'd already got the speakers. Ugh. So I can see why people would try not to buy the controller. Anyway, as for the power amp, well, didn't have to have that, but it was there in this shop where I bought my second pair of 802s, and I saw this thing there, and I just kept stopping every time I walked past and looked at this. And in the end, I waited and I borrowed some money and I saved, and I thought, let's get the Bose 1800. So I did. Difficult to compare that because I don't make amplifiers like that anymore, really. But they did. They're American muscle amps. There were loads of them around. I think Krell, Bristol, somebody beginning with L. There are loads of them. Going to be a bit boutiquey. I don't know. I'll just say that a Bristol 14B3, which looks similar cosmetically and has similar specs from what I can see, is probably, I would expect it to be better because it's new. But to give you an idea, those kinds of amps, passively cooled with fins on the side and all the rest of it, they're looking around £10,000, seriously built. So that's the Bristol. Again, just a wild guess as something fairly similar, but that was expensive in its day, the 1800. So basically, it's not for the faint-hearted, is it? Is it worth it? Here's a look at a 1979 driver, and it's got 3 lugs, which also makes them rather difficult to replace. £60 a shot from Bose. Ah, is that all? How many do I need? 64. Ah, okay. No, 32. Depends how many speakers you've got. But that's quite a weight. So to me, to throw that away, really, when what's wrong with it was this, which is what, like 2p worth of stuff? So let's chuck the whole thing. No, I'd ruin some. Now, I don't think I'd ruin them because there's videos and stuff online. It's much better. So I don't think I'd ruin any. Just take time, get the right tools, understand what you're doing. It can be done. This one is a spare then because some of them were a bit noisy. Let's see if this one is. Yeah, can you hear a little bit of... So that is not the cone rubbing, which sounds like that, because I was pressing on one side. So this one's not quite centered because it does it more on one side than the other. So I might redo these now if the panic's off and everything, and now I've got a better idea. I just cut that out and redo it. Thing to watch for, they're quite tough speakers. Watch for this here. One of them, and I've read somebody else saying it can happen, that it can, if you get a dry joint there, which wasn't one of mine, it takes the whole cab out because they're in series, they all run through each other. So if one's broken the connection, that's the end of it, the cab will go silent. So I just resoldered there, and that's all it was on that. So check that if you get, it's worth knowing, worth trying anyway, how you find out which one. You've got to take them all out, I'm afraid. But anyway. The other thing is that it's got a kind of plastic basket. Is that the basket, or is it called a frame? So it's fine. And they're quite tough, the speakers. So you can be tempted to sort of like flog them, knock them about a bit and think they're going to be all right. They will be mostly, but bear in mind then that if you've got 8 of these, so it's quite a heavy unit. When you, let me zoom out, when you drop them, if you drop them, if you drop the cab, what can happen is that the impact can cause, because the weight of the magnet can cause all this to shear, as you can imagine, suddenly hitting there, the weight of the magnet just, and then you'll have a load of magnets stuck together and bits of plastic will completely wreck the thing. So you've got to start with new drivers. So, but that's never happened to mine, but I've heard it can happen. So don't, just because they're in plastic and it's almost like they're in a flight case already, don't feel that you can just drop them. It won't work. There we go then. There are some aftermarket now manufacturers with this shape, and I think they go for about £20 a driver. I think Bose is asking around about 60. Personally, if you've got the Mark 1s and the foam's gone, I'd say take your time and refoam. It's going to cost you a lot less, and if you destroy 1 or 2, hopefully none, but then you've got 1 or 2 you've got to buy, but the rest you've saved. So I'd recommend that. But there are some aftermarket ones with metal frames that are meant to be 1 ohm as well, that are meant to be drop-in replacements for the Bose. Okay, I think we'll have a look at the, which I've already done it, a video there. We'll have a look around the 1800, and I'll tell you a bit about that. And then you can hear on a gig and see what you think. I think it's worth spending a bit of time on the Bose 1800. Well, why not? And there's an SM58 there for comparison size. So I have a high temperature indicator there, and there's a power on. The switch is, cat likes, is relayed, so when you switch it on, you hear a short delay and then a click. And then you hear nothing until you start pumping music through it. a bit reminiscent of the American muscle amps of that era. Around the back it's got a choice of binding posts or banana plugs. A bit unusual, but they weren't in the day, but a bit unusual now. You'd expect to see a speak-on or a XLR or something. Fuse, it's got an outlet there which you can run, if you get the right American plug, you can run the equalizer from that, so it saves having to have another plug for it. There we go. I will... What do you reckon? Yes, he seems to think so. I will whip the top off, just because I'm that kind of a guy, and show you inside. And this is what it's like inside. Two of the largest capacitors I've ever seen. The guy said so right when I had it tested. And there's enormous transformer, which looks toroidal. There used to be an E-core transformer, which would sit this way. It was even bigger and even heavier. There's a bank of 14 transistors either side. One thing to watch out for is that this little connection here, if you can see it, there's a right angled phono socket, and the same on the other side. That tends to get a little bit of this corrosive thing going on, and that can cause problems, so it needs cleaning every now and then. I think on one of these I saw they fitted a gold plated, which seems to be a good idea, because I think that's the signal goes there first before the rest of it, so if anything's compromised there, it's not so good. But you can just unplug them and clean them every now and then, or just inspect them to see if they're looking a bit oxidised. I've got various brochures here which I managed to collect over the years, kind of from that era, including this one, which is about the 1800 amplifier. 5-year warranty, so it says. Quite something, isn't it? Just something I'd mention. I'm going to put the specs up on screen. It's quite detailed, and something I really rather like. I think I do. This is Bose's, at the time, specification philosophy. It's interesting to see what they put, because they didn't put some specs down, and they're explaining why. I can see that might have been seen to be a bit arrogant by some of the others, when all these specs, people were looking at specs and it measures flat to this and it does that to do that, and Bose didn't do it. And I think some customers got a little bit curious about that, and I think some other of their competitors kind of thought, well, who are they not to put their specs? Must be because it's rubbish. So I think there's a little bit of that feeling going on. Let me read what it says. Most users fail to appreciate that there are two prices to be paid for impressive specifications in a power amplifier. The first price is increased cost. The second is decreased reliability, which results when amplifier bandwidth and distortion are pushed far beyond the limits of audible perfection. So that's what they're going for there. In order to help put an end to the specsmanship game, we will not engage. I love it. We will not engage in quoting specifications which are far in excess of those necessary to assure audible perfection. Rather, we will state first the requirements for audible perfection, and then confirm that the 1800 exceeds these requirements by a comfortable margin. Also, we will explain the price some amplifier designers have paid to improve specification for the purpose of specsmanship. Okay, a few ways to look at that, isn't it? One is just to agree with them. I think it sounds sensible to me. I suppose the thing people might be wondering is that it said, rather, we will state first the requirements for audible perfection and then confirm that the 1800 exceeds it. But it's kind of all about them, isn't it? So we'll state what it is. So you could kind of see, you could build an amplifier that does that, and then you think, all right, so let me make a statement about what's audible perfection that makes sure that amplifier falls in it. One would like to think that they did it the other way around, and maybe they did. That they look at audio, and there's a lot of stuff in here, got to tell you. So it looks like they're serious. So they'll state what audible perfection is. In other words, if you can't hear it, what's the point? And then let's build the amplifier to exceed that. That's kind of what they're saying. And I have no reason really to doubt it. Just to sum up then, obviously expensive. The system, in my experience, isn't rock and roll loud. It's kind of got a bandwidth thing about it, doesn't poke. So you've got to think, is it worth it for you? Is that what do you want from a system? Somebody said, a studio engineer who came to hear the band 20 years ago, he said, oh, it's like a big hi-fi. And that's kind of how it feels to me. But do you want a big hi-fi? Depends on your kind of singing, music. I would say it's very well designed and built. The foam rotting around the edge takes about 20 years, and most speakers, also camera backs that happens, that use foam, it rots. Just seems to be par for the course. So that's an expense, but nowadays, as I say, not so, if you've got the time and the inclination. It's 40 years old, still seems to be going strong. So value for money, basically I think with these things, are you in it for the long haul? And value for money, it seems to me, also is enjoyment and quality. You can spend less and feel grumpy every time you plug the thing in and use it, which to me erodes the value for money. If you spent a lot but it's good, then every time you plug it in and use it, over the years you're getting back, it seems to me. That's the way I look at it, if you can afford it. Also, along with that then, of course, comes second-hand value. So when you finally come to sell, you can get some of that back. Buying second-hand, buying stuff that's 40 years old now, second-hand, I don't know. But, I don't know, leave that with you. But of course, the most important thing is, does it sound any good? So I'll leave you to make up your own mind.
We like to do a blues. This one was, I don't know who it was done by originally, but Nat King Cole has done it, Diana Krall has done it. I don't know, loads of people. And it's called Baby All the Time. Once I had a girl, sweet as she could be. Once I had a girl, she was right for me. Kind of curly hair, eyes so sweet and true. You couldn't help but care when my baby looked at you. She called me baby. She called me baby all the time. She said, baby, can't you see? Baby, understand. She said, baby, you're for me. Won't you take my hand? But I pushed her away. I wouldn't let her near. I pushed her far away, but now I'm wishing I could hear her call me baby. She called me baby all the time. Lonely, lonely days, lonely, lonely nights, lonely, lonely hours without the girl I held so tight. Lord, I pray that you will listen to my plea. Oh, won't you keep my baby true so she'll come back to me and call me baby. She called me baby